Hello, once again, everyone, and welcome to Cut and Splice. This is Matt speaking.
This is Jason.
And this is Gil.
So, this time around, we're talking about the recent movie Golda, directed by Dinah and you'll forgive me if I got that pronunciation wrong. A movie about Golda Meir and the conflict that ensued in the 70s um, in the Yom Kippur War between Syria and Egypt, and obviously, ultimately, Israel. It's fundamentally, I think it's safe to say, a political thriller. Uh, Also a character drama, and Helen Mirren, I would dare to say, is a powerhouse in this, and like a shoe-in for a lot of award attention because, well, it's Helen Mirren and also one of the most important historical figures of the 20th century that she's playing. Yeah, I'll let the other guys come in and put in some commentary, and I'll reserve my statements for later. uh, Gil, you're the only Israeli in the group, so tell me what you think.
Yeah, actually, the one thing I was gonna say is, even though this was not intentional in any way, and I wasn't the one to recommend this movie. It was Matt that was more nudging us in that direction. It's already our second movie that's either done by an Israeli or like is Israel related after Waltz with Bashir. So it's good. I'm glad, I'm glad that we're getting the Jews in the mix, or at least the Israelis for that matter, even more so. But yeah, I'm glad. Like I didn't intend, like I wasn't 100% sure I was gonna watch this movie in theaters, and I wasn't sure also, definitely, because usually new movies we don't necessarily do an episode about that. I think we did like the Batman and a few of them where we felt like it was maybe somewhat appropriate to have a discussion about it. And I was on I didn't know like what this was gonna be. Obviously, I was gonna have an opinion on it because I'm Israeli, but I'm glad we watched it, and of course this was another one of those movies that me and Jason watched in a theater together, and it was extremely difficult not to discuss.
Yes.
But yeah, but I think it's worth a discussion, mostly from the angle of I mean, the critics definitely are not crazy about it, and I totally understand. Is for political reasons. I think it's one of those movies that like just politically, because maybe the movie doesn't like attend or give lip service to any sort of like political moral ambiguities, things like that about Israel's existence and the way it goes about came about being created, and how it's defended itself over the years. And I think this is one of the things that's lacking in the movie, or at least that's the way critics see it, and why they've given this movie a lot of crap. But I definitely agree with Matt that I mean, Helen Mirren, she's a shoo-in. Obviously, everything about this movie is sort of obvious, and maybe that's also the flaw of the movie, that's a little bit too obvious. But yeah, but I think that warrants a discussion for with the two of you. Apart from me, is just to see how you feel about that from an outside perspective, as opposed to like my inside perspective. Is the whole political aspect of it, and how heavy that weighs on any story that's told about Israel. And which obviously, like a movie like Waltz with Bashir was all about, like self-criticism. So they love that shit. If you're a self-critical movie, about Israel, yeah, that's gonna win people over. But when you're not, when you're just presenting sort of the facts and just kind of showing like this person was a person. I think me and Jason brought this up, is that it's essentially like Darkest Hour, the Israeli version.
Exactly.
So, and if you look at it that way, and same thing, Darkest Hour was also, people were critical of it for the same reasons, that like Churchill was a complicated politician. He had a lot of like, dark past and bad things that he did as a politician. But you can't deny that during a segment, a period of time, he did something incredible, and probably is one of the most important, British people to ever exist. Same thing with Golda Meir. So that's my main takeaway from it. I would say. And as far as rating it, it's tough. I probably would like be around a 7, just because I think for what it's trying to do, it's doing it okay. But I understand the some of the issues that people might have with it, where it seems like it's taking one side, but it's not really. It's just sort of like almost a procedural in a sense, and a character study. Like,
Yeah, I would probably also put it at somewhere around like a 7, I guess. It's I can get into some more details later when we have the time, when we're going into more of the details and spoilers and such. But um, to kind of to touch on what Gil was saying, to paint a picture here, we went and tried to find a a theater where we could watch this. I was kind of excited to see this movie and was frustrated that I couldn't find it playing here in Vegas. It might be this weekend now. Maybe it was just not playing the first weekend or something. But as far as I know, I couldn't find it anywhere here, and it was just worked out well that I was traveling last weekend out there to hang out with Gil, among other things. And yeah, so we were able to see this movie, and it's kind of funny because we got out of the movie, and there was a lot of wow, that was pretty good. And there was some things here we wanted to talk about it, and we started kind of half mentioning things, and you could tell there was this moment where we were like about to just dive in and just start talking about it, and I was like, let's call Matt and see if we're actually gonna do this. Because I mean, if Matt was gonna say, nah, I'm not gonna do it, or let's do another episode, let's do something else. If he was gonna give us the green light, we were gonna hang up the phone and just start talking about the movie.
Yeah.
But it's like, we gotta save it. All right. So what's been going on in your life? Just kind of awkward, like, all right, well, we both want to talk about this movie, but I guess we're not talking about it just yet. So but
and you know how hard it is for like me not to talk about Israel related stuff. There's definitely a lot of opinions when you
sure, of course, yeah. So that was kind of the oddly amusing, interesting situation we found ourselves in after watching it. But anyway, so yeah, I to sum it up though, before going into all the details and everything, I thought it was pretty good. I did have some frustrations with it, just in terms of kind of the choices, the filmmaking choices.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing that really like ruined the movie for me or anything, but more like stuff I would have done different. And of course we can go into that, obviously, but more or less, to sum it up, like Gil said, I believe we said it's essentially the Israeli version of Darkest Hour, and in the sense that it's all about the leader of the country and the crazy amounts of difficulty and responsibility and hurdles and problems they had to overcome in the midst of a horrible war that's going on, where the people are dying and so on and so forth. Not to hit the nail on the head, but I mean, it was the darkest hour, kind of situation. But yeah, and it bears so many similarities to that movie in that sense. Also, in the sense that I think that that the movie is more or less carried by its lead. Not that I want to say anything negative about the cast. The supporting cast was good, but I mean, this is a Helen Mirren vehicle for sure, like without a doubt. Just as much as The Darkest Hour was for Gary Oldman.
Yeah, like borderline. I don't remember any character from Darkest Hour except for Gary Oldman. That's how much it was his movie.
Oh, I like that one guy who's see, the problem is I've never known his name. But
the fact that you referred to him as that one guy actually kind of makes the point.
I know it does make the point. If I was British, I'm sure I would know his name because he's a great character actor and he's been in many other movies that we've watched. I was gonna comment on like, oh, he was in that movie, and that movie, but like I just can't think of his name right now. He's the guy who has the whole famous tiger mouth scene,
Yeah.
Anyway.
The funny thing is, Darkest Hour didn't even cross my mind until you guys brought this up. I understand why Darkest Hour came up in that conversation because, like, yeah, I mean, Helen Mirren is basically pulling a Gary Oldman in this movie. She's not basically pulling a Gary Oldman. She's pulling a Gary Oldman. I mean, like, she is really just she is seeped into that role in so many ways, and she's so good that it's hard to. I mean, like, she's the only person that I think should win an acting Oscar who wasn't in Oppenheimer at this point. She's just freaking brilliant. It is the Helen Mirren masterclass in acting. The two movies that came to mind for me was actually Oppenheimer and Lincoln.
Yeah, I was telling Jason Oppenheimer too. Yeah, but because it was fresh on my mind, not that it was a closer comparison.
Right. Yeah. But like, if you look at it, this is both a strength and a weakness. One of the strengths that I think that Golda had over Lincoln was that Golda was portrayed as more flawed than Lincoln was in, the Spielberg film Lincoln. I mean, Lincoln was, like, Lincoln was never portrayed as any kind of an addict or any kind of a racist, even though, like, by today's standards, Lincoln had some pretty negative views of people of color and so on and so forth. Yeah, they never really delved into what Lincoln had wrong in his character. Golda, they portrayed her as being, a chain smoker and somebody who knew that she was killing herself with her own addiction, but still being sympathetic to her. And, she's got the weight of the world on her shoulders. And, yeah, your smoking isn't helping the fact that, we've got to try to keep you alive, and that ultimately kills her, and so on. Okay, yeah. Spoiler alert! It happened in 1978. Go fuck yourselves. If you don't know history, that's your own fault. But I think that there's a certain complexity that they gave to Golda, where, she did make certain decisions where, like, somebody in the room had a son who was on the front lines or, who was trapped. And, we are going to follow that mantra of like, leave no soldier behind. And as a result, we get a lot more people killed just for him to end up dead anyway. She has to deal with that kind of shit in a way that Lincoln never had to, in the movie at least. But also, like, one of the things is that they bring in all of those moments where she's, facing a board, which I kind of view as like an equivalent of the gray board scenes in Oppenheimer, where they're grilling her over her actions in regard to the war. And I was just thinking, like, geez, this would be a really good movie if they had just had the wherewithal to edit it in such a way that this all comes to a climax where, like, they're grilling her about her actions and it's juxtaposed with her actions. And
I was thinking that as well.
Just like they did with Oppenheimer, but the filmmaker just didn't see the opportunity there. But yeah, I think I would basically put it at like a 7.5. I mean, it was good. It was solid, and Liev Schreiber was great.
Yeah.
And I mean, so many of the people involved in this movie were incredibly talented and really showcased it, and didn't pull any punches. But uh, yeah, I mean, I just think it missed a few marks.
Yeah. I was mentioning to Jason as we were watching it that the guy who played Dado, the main like military guy that's always beside her, Lior Ashkenazi, he's a pretty big actor in Israel. I mean, he's older now. It's funny because he dyes his hair black for the movie, but he's got like very gray hair. He looks a lot younger in the movie, but there's a few Israeli actors that he cast in there. It kind of reminded me of Munich in some ways.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't know why, but I told Jason that I thought that Helen Mirren like was played like Golda in Munich, and maybe she was reprising it for a whole movie. But then I looked it up. It's like, oh, oops, I don't know why I thought that. That was not her. But maybe that's because she does pull it off so well that you almost feel like it just like makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, don't quote me on this, but I mean, my mom was telling me the other day that she read something that like Helen Mirren is actually like a distant cousin of Golda Meir.
What?
I wonder if that might be one of the reasons why she did it. Because again, I don't know what's her politics and stuff, or what would be her motivation to do a movie like this. But
probably because it's a good role.
Exactly. Hopefully it's because it's a good role, and I'm not denying, and we can I guess get to the spoilers soon, but I'm not denying that that the filmmaking is, especially when you compare it to like like Lincoln and Oppenheimer and even Darkest Hour, because Joe Wright, even though he's a poor man's like Spielberg or Nolan, he's still also like a very like bravado type of director. That's why those directors fit. Like they can bring a lot of excitement to movies like this. And in this movie, there's a few sequences where he tries to use audio, sort of like in Oppenheimer, the bombs and stuff, and the montagey stuff, or like you connect the actions in the war with what goes on in her head. So there's a few sequences like that that are fairly creative. But on the whole, he didn't put enough effort into the blocking and camera work within scenes. It was very static.
Yeah.
Like if you had like a Nolan or a Spielberg there, they would be like all over the place. I think there was like one nice shot where they hover over the table when they're like pushing in on her, but the rest of the scenes are just coverage. It's there's not enough kinetic energy there for something that's like a chamber drama, because it often can fall into some of the reviews that I read, like so it can fall into like essentially like sort of like a TV movie in a sense if you don't dramatize it enough.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I will probably stand by until the day I die, which is basically every film director should at least take a few classes on stage directing, like live theater directing, because I mean, when you don't have a camera, you really have to find things for people to do and make it interesting for people and sustain it for like 2 hours or more. And you can't just use the camera as a crutch. Like, I'm gonna get an insert, I'm gonna get an insert, I'm gonna, cut around and so on and so forth. No, find ways to make people do things. After you do that, the camera blocking actually becomes a lot easier.
Yeah,
Uh,
or just like you need like a lot of people do this, like where they'll make a movie. It's kind of like, PTA, like you said, he every evening or every morning before shooting, like There Will Be Blood, he was watching The Treasure of the Sierra Madre or something. So like oftentimes people will be watching movies, like it'll be their mantra while they're shooting. It's like, I'm not gonna make the exact same movie, but I wanted to have this movie in my head so I can be inspired by it every day. And I think, yes, a movie like Lincoln or Darkest Hour would have helped to be as a mantra for this movie.
yeah.
Yeah.
But in any case, but I guess I think, Jason, you were mentioning something before the spoilers, before we get into that, about the director's other work that you might want to check it out.
Oh, that, yeah.
Yeah, because he won the Oscar for the live action short, which was
Skin.
Skin, which was like sort of like I don't know if it was an excerpt or yeah, I think it might have been like a few scenes from his feature, because he made a feature Skin, but I think he essentially cut out a short out of it because they both came out in 2018.
Huh.
And the live action short, like um, I think the feature also did okay. It went to festivals and stuff, but the live action won the Oscar. Yeah, it's weird. I don't think it happens very often that both movies come out at the same time. Like,
Yeah, that's weird. I heard that he won an Oscar, and I was like, I want to go see that movie. And then when I went to his IMDb page, there was something on there about it. I'm not sure exactly what, but it just made me want to check it out.
yeah, I did see. If I'm not mistaken, I saw both of them, and the short. It was smart that he did the short because the short was way better than the movie. Because I feel like, yeah, over the course of the whole feature, he doesn't sustain it as well as he does in the short, and I think he just barely pulls off this Golda movie. So yeah, I didn't see his earlier stuff, which I think were mainly Israeli movies, but
Yeah.
yeah.
The feature has Jamie Bell and Bill Camp in it. And I don't think the short. Oh, and Vera Farmiga. I didn't see their names on the short film, so I don't know who's in that one. But
Yeah, no, I mean it's a solid movie. If you're interested in the sort of like the obviously the culture, it's kind of like American History X, just like a poor man's version of it. Like it's solid, it's serviceable, it's a story within that community of like white supremacist type of
so
thing.
Jamie Bell plays the Ed Norton character.
In a way, yeah, yeah. Basically, I think if I'm not mistaken, these are like white supremacists that are like, yeah, have a whole thing about tattoos.
Yeah, it says a
And
destitute young man raised by racist skinheads and notorious among white supremacists turns his back on the hatred and violence to transform his life. I don't know. I mean, it seems interesting. I like Jamie Bell. He's pretty good. I mean, obviously, I'm extremely jealous of the fact that he was able to marry Kate Mara, but I'm not going to hold that against him.
who did he marry?
I'm just joking. Anyway,
Yeah, but I think it might be worth a watch. Mostly, yeah, for the cultural aspect of it. It's definitely not the same movie as American History X. So
right.
yeah, but it's kind of like an indie, like it's got like an indie feel to it. Yeah,
That's cool.
so we Spoilers?
Sure.
Yeah.
Spoilers. I honestly don't know. We actually covered a lot of it this far.
Yeah, I was actually gonna say like, but whatever.
But is there any point that you can think of as far as like digging deeper into it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Israel wins, but I mean,
Well, I
no
will say
spoilers.
one thing that I didn't know. Maybe that could be a jumping off point, but because there's the whole like 6-day war they mentioned in the movie that
Yeah.
Israel preemptively. It was the only war that Israel preemptively striked because they knew that they were about to attack, and apparently there was a lot of negative political fallout out
Yeah.
of it. So that was one of the interesting things that I did not know is the fact that they basically could have had the jump on them again, but they didn't do it because the U.S. told them it's just going to be political suicide. So like
Yeah.
the fact
Yeah.
that the world basically told the Jewish state is like, fuck you, you can't defend yourself if you're going to preemptively strike. Even if you know someone is about to attack you, you must have casualty. You must like suffer the first blow before you can make a move. That just shows like some of the
Yeah.
the double standard and hypocrisy about the way people perceive the conflict with Israel. Because like
Yeah.
nobody would expect that of like a country like the US, or like if you have intelligence that the Iranians are about to, like, I don't know, bomb like New York, you want to tell me you don't do something about it? Like there's no way. Like there's no way that the US will be like, nope, we got to wait for the first blow before we do
Right.
anything.
Yeah. It's perverse logic. Basically, what Israel is being held to right now is equivalent to like Soviet style self-defense law, which is basically if the guy shoots you first, you have a right to shoot back, but you don't have a right to perceive the threat and shoot first. And of course that's dumb because it's pro criminal, pro violence, pro bad guy. The entire reason that we have like carry laws in the United States, and like the fact that we can do that is so we can perceive a threat and react to the threat.
Right.
Yeah, you don't need to let somebody shoot you or stab you before you defend yourself. What international ideas seem to have been for the last 50 freaking years is that Israel has to go under Soviet code of self-defense, which is that knife has to be in your stomach before you're allowed to use your own knife. And if you're carrying a gun, you're not allowed to use it because that person was just using a knife. And that's a problem. No, self-defense is only a valid thing if you're allowed to perceive the threat, understand the threat, be a reasonable person in assessing the threat, and responding in accordance with that threat. And the fact that international opinion and sometimes international law is saying, "Oh no, you've just got to take one in the jaw. Otherwise, we're going to view you as the bad guy in the situation," is just uh, unbelievably stupid.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's my rant. So not that I have any strong opinions, and not that I'm a Jew supremacist or anything, but
I think there's other terms for that, but
you always be an honorary Jew for me.
yeah. A Zionist or whatever. It's just like it just kind of pisses me off. I've never been to Israel. I plan to go there at some point, but in general, I'm shoot me. I'm pro-Israel.
Someday that would be a good trip to take you
Yeah,
to Israel. But
yeah.
Yeah, it'd be cool. I was gonna say, as we were watching this movie, uh, I, I mean, this obviously is a pretty bad telling, I guess, thing about how the state of you know um, history classes are in our public schools here in America. But the what with this movie being about a fairly important event of the 20th century. Like we're sitting here watching this, and I guess I should start earlier on. When we all lived together at one point in time, there was a time when Gil told me about the 6 Day War. I did not know what this is, and I've never even heard of this before. But Gil explains, and I think we got on IMDb or not IMDb, I'm sorry, Google Maps, and brought up a picture of the region, and he's just kind of describing the basic history of what happened and so on and so forth. And I remember telling him many years ago, like, that's a very incredible story. I was like, somebody should make a big movie about that, or something. And and then you guys, Matt tells us a while back, like, hey, there's this movie with Helen Mirren, and she's she's playing Golda Meir. It's the Israeli prime minister, I guess, and during this war, like 50 years ago or something like that. And I was like, oh, sweet. Oh man, let's go check this out. And so we go, and me and Gil didn't have really any time to discuss this or anything. We kind of went in blind, at least I feel like I did. And we're sitting here watching this movie, and as it starts, the intro of the movie is kind of like some if not actual news footage or recordings, it's kind of like made to feel like that. And it's kind of just giving you a quick backstory if you don't know. And it talks about like, oh, so the 6 Day War happened, and then this is the result, and this is what happened, and here's the state we're in now, and here's now it's years later, like I would say about a decade, right? Something like that. Let me just look this up real quick. I had it up here already. The 6 Day War was 1967, and then this movie takes place in 1973. So really, only about not even 10 years later. I guess probably about 7 years later or so.
Yeah.
But the point I'm getting at here, 6 years later, the point is that. So here I am watching this movie, and it's talking about this 6 Day War thing being in the past, and then now it's showing Golda Meir, and she's fairly old, and she's running the country, and so on and so forth. And then then this war breaks out, and I've also never heard of this war, which is the Yom Kippur War, and they're describing everything that Gil told me about. It's like basically coalition of Arab nations, coming together, like Egypt, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Iraq, Kuwait, all these different countries joining together to attack all at once, kind of thing. And I didn't want to mess with the movie. I didn't want to we're in a nice theater and everything, so I didn't say anything. But I did think about leaning over to Gil and just being like, how many times has this happened to you, for crying out loud?
Like Groundhog Day.
Yeah, I was like, God, this is crazy.
Yeah, it's like one of my my dream projects, which will probably never happen, is this whole basically a Lord of the Rings metaphor, like version.
Oh yeah, you've been talking about this for like 20 years now.
Yeah, like I have this idea of like basically I take each war that Israel went through, and I put it through the lens of a fantasy world, like a create like a completely new world with like different species and stuff, sort of like Lord of the Rings, Star Wars type of thing, and kind of like to explore the phenomena of war and what a hero means and how someone becomes a hero. There's a little bit of Dune in it, of course, like the whole messianic, like not that there would be a messianic thing, but just that there oftentimes, even though there's a nation, there's always a hero in the middle, kind of like she was the hero of this, at least for this specific movie, because there are a lot of heroes within the war, I'm sure.
Yeah, sure.
But in this specific movie, they focus on her. So, but that aside, yeah, it is interesting.
You should make that movie, by the way.
Yeah, first I need to write the script.
That's what I mean.
But
yeah, and then get about what $250 million
yeah,
to make it.
like Peter Jackson, I
Yeah.
need like 300 million to make 3 movies at the same time. But yeah, but I think what I was gonna say about the wars, and well, yeah, the wars, that's one thing that is interesting, but also I think, and we should have touched on this before the spoilers, because that's a big thing I think the movie was going for, which you would think nowadays people would be into, is the fact that this movie, it's a war and all these things and aggression and men, but in the middle of it there's a woman. So in a way, this is a very, very feminist movie. If you want to talk about like this, if you want to do like a double feature, you need to do this and Barbie, if anything, because not that I've seen Barbie, but I'll see it eventually.
I mean, it would be a good masterclass in watching one movie that's pretty good and one movie that's absolute garbage.
Wow.
I'm probably gonna like it
but-
more
Hot
than
take.
you. But in any case, but what I think this is like, it's undeniable that this is a feminist movie, because there's all these points where like the Moshe Dayan,
Well, it's a very progressive film.
Oh, I mean, not really. This is just what happened. Like, it's just happened to be that this woman
Right.
was a politician in Israel, and she got elected because people vote for their party oftentimes, and for personalities, and not always for gender. And she was a tough woman. Oftentimes, women that get into power, like Margaret Thatcher and other people, they tend to be tough cookies. But it's not just that like she was very cool under pressure. When other men around her, like I mentioned, Moshe Dayan, the Ministry of Defense, like was like collapsing and was having like the jitters. It's just to show that you can have a very strong female leader, and there's absolutely like nothing wrong with that. It kind of reminded me of like the whole, back when like the whole Trump and Hillary thing. I think it was my dad of all people was like, he was very pro-Trump, because Israelis were pro-Trump because they're very right wing. But it was like, so what? I mean, like, we had Golda Meir, like, it's like, who said that? Like, because my dad was like, oh, he's a strong guy, he's a strong man, that's what we need in the world. And I'm like, but come on, I mean, it's not that you want to tell me Hillary is not like I mean, she's like a total, like, if you want to talk like
she's a cold box.
exactly, she's like also a tough cookie. She's got problems, I'm not denying it, and she definitely had likability issues, which is probably why she didn't get elected. It wasn't any other reason. But you can't tell me that she wouldn't be capable of handling high stress, like difficult situation and decisions. So I think this movie is a good illustration of that. If for anything else, forget the politics, forget anything else, is that you really should, when you watch this movie, you don't really think about it, but it's part of it. It is. She is a woman, but really, she's a person. That's what she was. She's a person, and she dealt with the situation the way a solid leader should. And ultimately, like, that's what I guess I shines through more than anything else, I think, in this movie.
Yeah, it's a great part for sure.
I mean, it was a human being dealing with human issues at a really important time in world history, and she dealt with it the best that she can, the best that she could, regardless of how flawed she might have been and how many mistakes she may have made. Uh, I mean, it's just one of those things where you have to look back on history and say, bravo. Like you fucked up a few times, but
Everybody does.
yeah, right.
Man or woman.
And you're probably better than better than most of us.
Yeah, and that's the thing I'm saying is that it was subtle. The movie wasn't
Yeah.
playing that up, and that's the way. That's if you want a lesson that woke movies should have is that don't lay it thick. Like it just needs to be like a happenstance. Oh, and by the way,
Right.
she's a woman. Like she's a kick-ass. It's kind of like Sigourney Weaver in the Alien movies and other things. Like it's not as like look at her. She's a woman and she's so great. No, no, no. She's a hero. She does great things. She just happens to be a woman. And you can even play into it that some of her, the qualities that a woman might have is what played well into her, like motherly instincts and things like that. It's just to say that like there's pros and cons to being a man or a woman, and
But
they
what is
both
a
have
woman?
flaws. Yeah. But in any case, don't lay it thick. Just let it like hover there and just be there and just tell good stories and it'll shine through. Don't force it.
I think that should be the lesson of all filmmaking is just tell good stories.
Yeah, I mean, one of the moments that stood out to me, both positively and negatively, was when they had a moment where Golda, had her like stomach problem and she barely made it to the sink and she was vomiting blood. Okay, full disclosure to anybody in the audience that doesn't know that I have a history of alcohol problems. I've done that scene was not realistic in terms of like how that works. Like it is much more painful. The blood doesn't look like blood. It looks like coffee grounds.
She might have had a different case or a different problem.
Yeah.
Now, if you're
Well,
if
that's
you're
like a
vomiting,
cancer coughing blood.
now if you're vomiting from your organs, it's going to be darker.
Oh yeah.
And
Well, definitely the color. I'm sure they might have not gotten right.
right, yeah, and so on and so forth. But
Because for the movie, you always want to go like reddish because that's what people
yeah,
expect, and it
right,
reads better on camera and stuff.
right. So that's a little bit of that's a small negative issue that 99% of people aren't going to get. What that scene did do was show like, holy crap, this woman is going through something that most of us would just be like, take me to the hospital, pump me full of drugs, take me out of this whole situation. I'm done. I can't deal with this. And she was just literally stomaching it. And I absolutely believe that Golda Meir was absolutely stomaching that she was just taking it. She was just taking it to the gut all the way. And that's what the movie did really well, was just showing that she was dealing with this and actually this might be one of the great things about this movie having a female protagonist, and that like with men you can understand having a guy in that position who's just like calm and calculated, just like
it's been portrayed in movies before.
Right. It's just like, hey, we're going to save this many men by sacrificing this many men. So, like, just fuck it, do it. Like, just make those decisions. Women, like, if we're going to be honest, like, women have more compassion than men do. Like, they just do. And so I having a woman in that kind of a situation and having to deal with that shit, it was probably infinitely harder on Golda Meir to deal with what was going on than it would have been for Sharon.
Who's that?
Than it would have.
The guy that stole the cake.
Oh, that guy.
Indeed.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Didn't steal, but grabbed the piece.
Yeah.
right. It must have been infinitely harder for Golda to deal with that than it would have been for most men in power. Because I mean, how many tears do you think that Biden has shed over the complete debacle that was, the pullout of Afghanistan, with people clinging onto the side of the planes as they were taking off and everything, and to their deaths because they were so afraid of what the Taliban would do to them after 20 years of American interference. I don't think Biden shed a single tear over that. Golda Meir probably had to emotionally deal with every decision that she made in the way that the movie actually portrayed. Like, Golda Meir probably had to process that in a way that most of us guys don't have to really deal with.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I mean, I think you're maybe like overstretching as far as like
Yeah,
knowing what
infinitely
Biden
is
or
a
like
strong term. Yeah.
but there's no denying that a woman might feel it stronger, but it has to be a certain type of woman. I can't. I can only imagine that someone like a Margaret Thatcher actually might have not like been as like, because that's the other thing is like Golda, if I'm not mistaken. That's crazy that I don't know this, but like is I'm trying to remember like what party she was. I think she was part of like the left. She was if I'm not mistaken, yeah, Labor. But the Labor Party. Yeah, and people on the left tend to be generally. I think the left was in because Israel was a very socialist country, basically the first few decades until the right wing kind of like, if I'm not mistaken, right after Golda. I don't know, I don't remember the sequence, but like not too long after is when there was like a kind of like a flip politically, probably because of all these wars just accumulating on the psyche of the nation and just saying like, we just need like stronger people in power, and the right wing were just a bit tougher on, they're like willing to do crazier stuff than the left wing people. But yeah, so it's people on the left generally tend to be already very sympathetic and, so to have be a woman on the left, that definitely I can see that. But yeah, but at the same time, like I said before, these are politicians. Like they have to make tough decisions, and yes, it hurts, but it's at the same time that they have to deal with so many deaths that you sort of get what's the word, desensitized to it, like
Yeah.
so yeah, it's tough. It's a tough job, like especially like for a warring nation that like
Yeah.
has to go through this again and again and again. Because what I was feeling is like to think about someone at that time, like in the 70s in Israel, and like there's an X number of Jews in the world, and it's coming off of the Holocaust where 6 million were killed. And you're like, think of all these, like she was writing all these numbers on a notebook, and it's like all these like, and she mentions a few times that quote about like an army of what's it called, like orphans and orphans and widows.
Yeah.
Because that's what happens at war is like you have like a huge chunk of the men, often the men die, and just thinking like, we just flocked to Israel in the hundreds of thousands and like millions, and then we're just like killing ourselves little by little with all these wars, that it hurts. It's it's not what the mission was in creating the nation. So it's such a tough, complicated situation. But the Jews were really like stubborn, and they insisted on coming back to to the promised land, and oftentimes people that criticize Israel. I remember there was that joke. I don't know what was the joke that was brought up somewhere. I think it was like in a TV show, or someone said that. I think it was like Boston Law or something, Boston Legal. And it says war weary Jews decide to settle amongst a bunch of nations that want to kill them. Like the whole idea that like of all the places that the Jews could go to after the Holocaust, like the last place they should have gone to is the place where there's a bunch of other people that want to kill them. But what are you gonna do? I mean, this is the one land that they had the most connection with, and it was available, like to some degree, even though it was occupied by some people. It wasn't like there wasn't an actual country there. It was essentially a territory, and they thought that they could make it work, and they can just split it with the Arabs. And lo and behold, they should have known that it wasn't going to work out. But and we're like 70 plus years later, and it's still not working out. So it's very unfortunate.
Yeah.
A few of the positive things I was going to say about this movie, I guess a few of the positive things and the one real negative criticism that I have about the movie, there are these, you were talking about the way the movie is shot and kind of some of its like overuse of simple basic coverage and stuff like that, basically not being cinematic enough, I guess would be the simplest way of putting it. And I agree with that. I did want to point out a couple of things that I thought were really positive that kind of go against that, but not in any huge way. But I wish I could remember what the outcome of the shot was, because it's something very important. And if we had recorded this earlier, I might have remembered. But there's a moment where she's laying in bed, and she first gets into bed. And it's a very tense moment for her. A lot of stuff's happening. A lot of people are dying. And I think, if I remember correctly, she comes to some sort of epiphany or something like that at the end of the shot. But there is this really interesting shot they decided to do where it's in her room and she gets into bed, and the camera it sort of hovers across the room in a very odd way. It's kind of rolling left and right a little bit. Well, I got the impression that it was almost moving like a little bit of a snake almost, but it starts down by the foot of her bed, and it's almost as if the camera climbs into bed with her in a sense, because by the end of the shot, you're like side by side with her, the way that coverage normally would be when someone's in bed. But the way in which they got to it was much more visually compelling than if they had just, trucked the camera over on a dolly, But anyway, that was interesting. And then also, probably for me, the strongest moments in the movie were the two scenes where she's given some orders for some battle plan or something like that to take place. And the first one, I think, is the really bad one where they lost a whole bunch of guys. And then the second one is the more triumphant one, but which of course is why they filmed it this way. But it's just kind of really good. She goes into this like war room kind of situation, and it's a situation that's where all the information is being conveyed over the radios, basically. So they're just sitting there listening to the battle unfold, and you're just getting a lot of really tense shots of her face. And what did you say that guy's name was? Lior Ashkenazi or something like that.
Oh yeah, the actor.
Yeah, the actors. Those two. Basically, you get a lot of shots of them, and I think the radio operator and stuff like that. And it's good. It's kind of like almost like a submarine, scene when you think about it, because it's a lot of action that's happening, but really it's all being conveyed to you from people in a room, kind of thing. You're not seeing the action take place, and I really loved those scenes. However, I have to say that I think the entire movie would have been better, and I think those two scenes would have played at least twice as powerfully if they kind of juxtapose the rest of the movie rather than being the same as the rest of the movie. This movie, I know that they were trying to make the kind of movie that they made. You know, they're kind of like we said before, a good example of what this movie is like Darkest Hour, or Lincoln in a way too. Although I'll comment on that later. So I know that it's not, you know, this is not a war film in a traditional sense. It's not a, you know, certainly not an action movie or anything like that. But had this movie shown a little bit more rather than talked about, I think it would have been more powerful. And I'm not looking for intense action scenes or anything like that. I'm not looking for big battles or anything. But you know, the beginning of the movie starts with talking about the 6-Day War. And as Gil brought up, towards the end, it kind of makes a real nice point, the movie itself, sort of pointing out the difference between the outcome of the 6-Day War, which is the one that Israel got a lot of flack for, and this one where they played by the rules and lost, I would assume, what is it, probably thousands of people, you know, many people died, you know, unnecessary deaths, or arguably unnecessary deaths, because of their choice to play by the rules that the politics of the time were setting up, you know. And to me, that point would have really been driven home well if we had if they had shown, not just talked about the 6-Day War, but like really shown images and things to really convey that, look, 7 years prior to the events of this movie, this happened already. You know, these same countries attacked all at once, and because of a preemptive strike, it lasted 6 days and they were all defeated. And that's miraculous. You know, I don't need to see an hour of that. I just need to see like 4 minutes. You know, give me, it could be like newsreel type footage. It could be a lot of stuff, but like what they show at the beginning is very minimal, like extremely minimal. If you showed something to illustrate that point, to illustrate the history of that in a very visual way, and then in this, when the movie starts, when all the action, all the battles start and everything, I don't need to see massive battle scenes, but show me a little bit of the devastation. You know, show me some of the stuff going on. I don't need to know the characters firsthand or anything like that, but I mean, I will admit that they do a good job letting me feel the deaths through the characters, like that one woman whose husband was at the front or something like that.
Yeah, her son, I think.
Son. I'm sorry, son. Yeah, but they do a good job with the movie. They do make you feel for the characters and for the country and for everything going on. But I really feel like a little bit of time, not much, just a little bit of time to show the kind of devastation that was taking place in these battles, to show where these columns of tanks are moving around. They're talking about the canal. I think they're talking about the Suez Canal, right?
I think so. Yeah.
I think so. Anyway, I don't really. Again, I don't need to see big giant action scenes, but there's all these moments where they're talking to each other about what has already taken place, like the battles, that the results of the battles and stuff. You can intercut, you know, footage of like war torn landscapes and stuff like that. I mean, we can see like you know, coffins and bodies and stuff like that. I mean, there's ways that they could have visualized some of the true devastation that took place in this war, and then to juxtapose that with what happened 7 years prior, where, you know, for all accounts was a pretty tremendous success considering what they were up against, you know, and everything. And then that, I really feel, would have really hammered things home better. And then just kind of along the same lines with that, just showing more stuff rather than talking about it. If you had shown little bits of some of the action and violence, I think those scenes where the whole battle plays out just with their reactions would have been more of a juxtaposition, would have been more powerful.
Yeah, I can only imagine with the right budget for sure. But I think this movie again is trying to do what Darkest Hour and other movies of this type do, is like they kind of stick to let your imagination run wild with what's going on there, and it's what it kind of puts you in the shoes of the politicians and the military like generals, because they're not in the front line. They only can get these reports, and they can only imagine as well how bad it is there. So I think that's part of the strategy of these movies, that way you stay from their point of view as opposed to like having a soldier's point of view.
Yeah.
But I there's definitely an aspect to this movie that's like sort of like as also expects us to know a bit of the history, or maybe like to know what was like going on, and like the fronts and like the the north south. Like maybe there could have been at least a bit more about the maps, and where the north is, where the south is, like where the they don't. I feel like they could have been slightly more visualized for people who don't know,
like me,
what the geography. Yeah, exactly. Because I knew exactly like what the but I'm sure most people don't know the exact like where Syria is exactly, or where like Sinai and like the Egyptian, and then the whole thing. There's that whole buffer between Egypt and Israel. That's the Sinai, which if
didn't
I'm not
they
mistaken,
mention the Golan Heights too?
Golan Heights is that was the buffer that I think in the 6-Day War that was won by Israel, and then the Syrians essentially took it over, and then eventually they pushed them back out, and they got it back. But yeah, it was like a conquered part of Syria that they got, I think, in the 6-Day War that was almost lost. And it was like a strategic thing. Like it's not that they necessarily, obviously, the way, unfortunately, Israelis and Jews are is like the second they win a land, they occupy it because they want to like make it their own. But it was mainly like for strategic reasons that they wanted to keep it, because it was a high ground. So it would have been like just a very easy way for the Syrians to continue attacking them again and again. This is the whole problem with the Jewish or Israeli dilemma, is that even though hopefully over time, like the more technology evolves as far as wars, like the high ground is not going to matter as much. But it's already too late, of course, because there's settlements and everything. But the reason why all these like land grabs that happened by Israel over the years, they tended to have to do with pure strategic, like military strategic, calculations. They just needed to make sure that when the next attack comes, because it was gonna come, that they would be in a better position, that they wouldn't be risking too many lives or the destruction of the entire nation. And unfortunately, the way it looks, it just looks bad, because like it looks like Israel is trying to gain more and more territory, but really they're just trying to like get themselves in a better and better position, so it'll be more and more difficult to attack them. And it sort of worked, because they left them alone. Eventually, after I think the 80 something was when they
There
get
was
back.
another one.
There was another one like in the 80s. It wasn't like as bad.
Yeah.
But and obviously there's a
God.
lot of like insurgencies and stuff, like whatever the stuff, like when the like
People
Lebanon
really
wars
hate
and
the Jews.
but there was like another big one in the early 80s. Yeah, no, it's I think after the early 80s, that's when it ended. Like that's where basically, because they made peace with Egypt, and Egypt was like one of the strongest militaries, and at least as far as the and then Jordan was also kind of like, we're done with this. And then and nobody really liked the Palestinians as it was, and Syria was just always like very anti-Israel, and Lebanon had like aspects of it, because it was like a semi-Christian, semi-Muslim nation. So like Lebanon also had like factions that were anti-Israel. So it's basically it just became Lebanon and Syria that still hated Israel. But there's no way for them to like really fully on attack. So that's when the insurgencies, like things happen, like the whole attacking of like the Lebanon war was basically just trying to just kill as many Jewish soldiers as possible, just because, Israeli soldiers. But and then of course the territories themselves, like Gaza and the West Bank, it's just such a messy situation. But they were right. Like when they conquered those like pieces of land, for one thing, they used the Sinai as like a, if I'm not mistaken, they conquered that and they gave it back for peace with Egypt. And I'm sure they could have done something similar with some of the land in the north for Syria, but Syria was just never interested, so they just kept it for strategic reasons. And it's very, very messy. Yeah, and
it
Jordan
sounds complicated.
And Jordan abandoned the West Bank. Like essentially, like Jordan like was kind of like, take them. We don't want to like, because there was the period of time like in the 60s where like they were still in control of the West Bank and Israel only had, but then when Israel got Jerusalem back, then Jordan just kind of retreated and said like, you take care of them now, of all the Palestinians that were like in the West Bank territory, which was just a recipe for disaster. And to this day, it's not resolved.